Welcome back, Space Cases. Space Cadet here. Today, in our continuing series, Are We There Yet?, we're going to be covering Standard Year 230 to Standard Year 350. I would prefer to cover history in 100-year blocks, but the Protectorate keeps leaving big blank spots in the published history to give them room to change the narrative as they see fit. So sit back and let's get to it. Mr. Whizbang, roll the intro. Standard Year 230. A second mission to the other habitable moons in the Lemurian system is terminated after a series of training mishaps. Or, more to the point, the people they picked were too stupid to do the job. Standard Year 275. The first of the two probes sent to nearby systems begin to transmit data back to Lemuria. This marks the discovery of the Mayan system. 5 planets, 3 gaseous, including a giant, and 2 rocky, as well as a significant asteroid field, orbit a red dwarf that gives off 20% of the luminosity of Helion. The EF names the star Spectre after they have difficulty tracking it, as their view is repeatedly eclipsed by the objects orbiting it. 2 worlds in the system will support life: the second planet, Mayu, and Epitaph, a moon of the gas giant Eulogy. Both show signs of previous colonization. Sensors transmitted images of empty candy bar wrappers and discarded condoms all over the surface. There are no signs of complex life, but there are signs of technology, particularly a series of dormant superstructures that appear to be solar power collection units, and another of the so-called Stygian gates. The GOL mandates the EF travel to the new system in the next 200 years, to once again give the GOL time to come up with a reason to force people to go there and generate resources for the elite. Plans are made to establish a base on one of the 2 potentially habitable moons in the Lemurian system to be a forward launch for future exploration and colonization efforts, since the current launch facilities were obscuring the view of several elites and could then be demolished to make way for a golf course. Standard Year 300. The EF launches 2 task forces comprised of 100 personnel each to the 2 habitable moons in the Lemurian system to determine suitability for long-term habitation and bases for exploration beyond the system. The first task force reaches the icy moon Nisa in 2 years. The task force orbited the moon for 3 months before landing. It was, after all, the holiday season, and finding a parking spot was a nightmare. The task force has difficulty contending with the ice, but detects an active core. This all because the EF failed to send the expedition with any hot cocoa. After 3 months of surveying and exploration, the task force returns to Lemuria. The official report was rumored to have read, "Place sucked, send wage slaves, we're out, bitches." The second task force reaches the rocky moon of Vangar in 3 years. Signs of previous habitation by the Mazukai exist on the surface, including what was initially reported as a giant wooden badger, but was later determined to be a smudge on the camera. Unlike Lemuria and Emphirion, this moon shows signs of conflict, which may have led to the extinction of the Mazukai. Task Force scientists discover higher than usual levels of gamma radiation, suggesting the use of nuclear weapons. The presence of various craters formed after the apparent destruction of the civilization and thinning of the atmosphere obscure further forensics collection efforts. The GOL, based on reports of potential habitation, approves plans to establish a facility for scientific study on the surface. Standard Year 305. A new EF task force of 1,000 people travel to Vangar and begin to establish a permanent presence. Plans are made to terraform the surface and establish a breathable atmosphere by releasing oxygen into the air. since it has been recently discovered that oxygen is required for wage slaves to live. Several large biodomes are set up, and para-terraforming efforts begin. Special algae requiring a fraction of the light available on Lemuria are created through genetic manipulation. Nearby asteroids are mined for water. Regular supply runs and new deployments of scientific personnel come from Lemuria. Many of the EFMC are from Inferion, causing a mix of the two cultures for the first time. So essentially, Vangar could be considered the first petri dish of known space. Standard year 325. Vangar and Nyssa enter a 20-year window of proximity. The EF determines that it can take advantage of this window to further study and build infrastructure. The colonists establish subsurface buildings on Vangar. Without a permanent atmosphere, the GOL makes no plans to further colonize the moon. The colony expands to 15,000 under the control of the EF, split evenly between civilian workers, EF personnel, and EFMC personnel. The EF is granted autonomy to plan further efforts beyond the Lemurian system. Effectively, after a couple of hundred years, the GOL stopped caring what the EF did with its budget. The only requirement was they had to keep finding places for the GOL to send wage slaves to generate income for the elites. The second probe, launched in Standard Year 110, returns information from a third nearby system, 20 light years from Lemuria. This marks the discovery of the Atlantean system, consisting of 5 planets orbiting a white star, later named Diadem, that gives off 92% of the luminosity of Hellion. 3 of the planets are gaseous and 2 are rocky. 3 planetary bodies rest in the habitable zone and show signs of previous habitation. Atlantis, the first planet from Diadem, its moon Eidolon, and the second planet Oasis. There are no signs of life, but there are signs of technology. Again, the satellite reports a series of dormant superstructures that appear to be solar power collection units and another Stygian gate. A type of object not previously encountered orbits the second planet. The object is shaped like a planet and appears to be artificially constructed, but its purpose is indeterminable. It will later be referred to as Starnet. Until then, commonly though, it's referred to as the round Atlantean thing. Standard Year 335. A base of 1,000 EF and EFMC personnel and 500 contract mining personnel is established on Nyssa. Due to residual radiation on Nyssa's planet, Nirvana, the task force burrows into the ice. They do not encounter any life forms, but there are Mazukai artifacts embedded therein. Mined Nyssan ice is transported in bulk to Vangar to help eventual terraforming efforts. Civil unrest plagues Inferion and rural areas of Lemuria. Nyssa and Vangar avoid such issues, though many of the colonists are sympathetic. Standard Year 350. A second probe is launched from Vangar towards the Mayun system to study the 2 detected habitable locations, Mayu and Epitaph. The EF begins releasing oxygen into the atmosphere of Vangar. This oxygen was made by the lowest bidder, though, and soon began forming unions of ozone. Later reports suggest that this inferior oxygen might have also been involved in several oxidation incidents around Vangar. The CDFMP were called in to quell the process, but were unable to apprehend more than 4% of the oxygen. The rest escaped as respiration. In 3 years, algae altered on the planet begin cleaning the air with minimal support. Within 10 years, temperatures begin to rise on Vangar as tailored greenhouse gases released by the EF take effect. Following a highly publicized dissident execution at the hands of the CDFMP, civil unrest again boils over in violent protest on Inferion and Lemuria. Executions lead to unrest. Hang on, let me write that down. A new agency known as the Civic Control Agency, or CCA, is formed to support the central government's colonization planning efforts and address potential civil unrest. The original name, the Civic Oppression Agency, was deemed unfavorable in test markets. That brings us to the end of another episode of Are We There Yet?, the series that explores our history and tries to understand how we've managed to make it this far. It's a cold universe out there, Space Cases, so stay warm and keep your zap gun handy. This is the Space Cadet, signing off. Hey everyone, if you like what I'm doing here and you want to see more videos like this, just perform the ritual of like, share, and subscribe. Adios!